Hello everyone, I'm Isaac, and today I'm going to be speaking about the effects of vaccines on health. Specifically, I'm going to talk about vaccines which contain thimerosal, and I'm going to argue that they cause significant health problems to people, especially infants in utero. Now, let's start with some definitions. Thimerosal is a trade name for sodium ethyl mercury thiosalicylate. Very long name, but it contains 49.55% mercury by weight. So it's about 50-50 mercury, 50-50 organic materials. Some background on this would be that back in 1999, the American Association of Physicians and the CDC said that they were working collaboratively to ensure that the replacement of thimerosal-containing vaccines takes place as expeditiously as possible, while at the same time ensuring that our high vaccination coverage levels and their associated low disease levels throughout our entire childhood population are maintained. So basically 15 years ago, the CDC identified that thimerosal was potentially a problem, and they started to try and get rid of it. Now, that leads me to my first point, which is that the mercury from thimerosal in vaccines is hazardous for infants. Over the last 15 years, the thimerosal that is in vaccines has not changed as far as for many diseases such as for influenza. Starting from like if 50% of the mercury from thimerosal in a vaccine is going into an infant at 42 weeks, then the vaccine contains 25 micrograms of mercury. Is going to basically give pregnant women, the children inside pregnant women, 34 times the EPA's safety limit for infants. What this basically means is that in this like standard influenza vaccine, it is the amount of mercury that's going into the baby. If it was 50% into the baby instead of 100% into the baby or 90% into the baby, that it would be 34 times the amount of mercury that should be allowed into it according to the CDC's guidelines on mercury safety. According to the article Thimerosal Clinical Epidemiologic and Biological Studies, which is compiled by 6 different MDs, mainly by David Geyer, who has an MD and a PhD. He argues that even assuming 99% elimination of mercury by the placenta, a developing fetus at 16 weeks old is still going to receive a dose of mercury that is greater than the 2.5 times the EPA limit for safety on mercury. He also argued that infants receiving an additional 100 micrograms of mercury from thimerosal in childhood vaccines between birth and 7 months of age, they showed a statistically significant increased ratio of 2.875 to 1 for autistic disorder diagnosis, as well as a ratio of 2.44 for autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. Essentially, even though thimerosal is claimed to be not effective as far as causing autism, there is some research that shows that children who receive 100 micrograms, which is a lot of mercury from thimerosal, would have an increased ratio for having autism. They argue that the culmination of research in the field of thimerosal indicates that it is poison at minute levels, and with poison at minute levels with a plethora of deleterious consequences, then there is clear cause for concern. This leads into my second point, which is that mercury is just as poisonous to adults as it is to infants, even though thimerosal is only an organic mercury. So mercury poisoning affects people differently, but it has some very bad effects, including as far as from organic mercury, which is what thimerosal is, as opposed to elemental mercury, which is what would be in, say, amalgam fillings and in fish that you eat. So as far as the side effects and symptoms of organic mercury, is that it leads to, according to the MD Charles Patrick Davis, it leads to peripheral vision impairment, loss of coordination, muscle weakness, and other impairments of speech and hearing. And this can be very detrimental and can be caused by, it can be caused from thimerosal potentially. Now, while there is a lot of research that has been done on thimerosal over its 80 years of existence, some more research should be done, but what can be concluded now at this point is that vaccines that contain thimerosal can lead to organic mercury poisoning in adults and significant health problems for infants. Thank you.
All right, Isaac, the proposition's labeled. There's controversy on the subject. I think you're in pretty good shape there. There's no preview of what the supporting structure is going to be. That's a little bit problematic. But the structure, when you present it, is relatively clear. It's a simple two-part structure. At the end of the speech, you have a summary of that also makes it clear where the argument is going and how it develops, so that was fine. There's a lot of information that's cited in the speech that's background information and explains concepts and ideas, and I think it's useful to have that, and it helps put things into a particular context. But there were a couple of contexts that were a little confusing. It sounded, for example, like the infant's exposure that's going to get as much as you're talking about it being at risk requires that they're being vaccinated in utero, and I don't think that that's really what you're talking about. So some of the numbers are being conflated here. It might be that there's some kind of cross-contamination by pregnant women who get vaccinations, or maybe you're talking about that there's an accumulation in the amount of mercury that is in the system of babies, and then when they get the additional shots after they're born, that becomes a problem. I think that was a little bit unclear, and some of the information runs together on that point. I think you do a good job, though, explaining why mercury is, and particularly this variant combination, is potentially problematic. The risk factors are, you've got one statistical comparison that talks about that, then you've got another one. At one point you're making comparisons about autism rates, and another point you're talking about how it's 34 times, it's over 34 times the safety limit. So we would expect to see some differential level based on the amount of exposure that's given, and I didn't see a lot of data that was related to that, just what the potential impact is from some of these exposures. You did a good job citing sources for the most part. There were a couple places where I got references to they or some study that was done, but most of the time you qualify your sources and attempt to give them some credibility, which I thought was a good thing to do. There's a lot of reading, a couple of spots where maybe a lot of lack of familiarity with terminology is problematic, but that's just something I think practice would take care of. All right, thank you.